We are so excited to welcome Jennie Monness, the co-founder of Union Square Play, founder of Charmspring, an early childhood educator, entrepreneur, and podcast host. Through her work, she's created spaces that support both parents and children, blending developmental wisdom and real-life parenting. She's worn many, many hats, but the role of mother has deeply influenced how she shows up in all of them. In today's episode, we sit down with Jennie to explore her journey from educator to entrepreneur to mother and how those identities intersect, evolve, and stretch us in ways we've never expected. So with that, let's dive in. We were just on Jennie's podcast about a week ago.
Our episode went live today.
Dale and I were really in the thick of it when we spoke to Jennie. I don't think your nanny just quit on you. Mine had COVID. We were just in the depths of motherhood. And it was so nice to speak to Jennie, who really just kind of understood the journey and just the mental load of just being a mom. You currently wear many, many different hats, and your identity has changed and evolved so many times. So we'd love to start on who were you before motherhood?
Yeah, it's interesting when I think of this question. Of course, you think of it on a surface level, like who was I, as a person in my career, as a wife, just sister, all those things. But what came to mind first for me when I thought of this question was who I was more on a deeper level. And I feel like I was an achieving or trying to be perfectionist. And so with that, I felt like I was always trying to be prepared. Working in early childhood, I felt like before I was a mom, I was trying to prepare for that. Obviously, once it came into my realm of this was next for me, and trying to do all the things to try and make sure I had it right and perfect. And so I'd say that like what's evolved most for me is realizing that that's just not what I want to be anymore, and what isn't good for myself and for what the example I'm setting for my kids, and just on so many levels. So I feel like that's been the biggest growth and shift for me in terms of who I've become and who I was.
So I am also a recovering people pleaser, perfectionist, all of that. Yeah. How did you let go of that perfectionism? Because I think it's very easy for us to be maybe self-aware that we have it, but to let go of it is not easy.
Not at all. Honestly, I felt proud of that. Like trying to be perfect is such a great goal to have, not settling for anything less. I was aware of it, but I think what helped me realize that it wasn't what I wanted first was through the lens of my kids, honestly. And on two levels. One, I felt like I wasn't showing up for them in the way that I wanted to once it became hard to maintain that, right? After having two and wearing these multiple hats in my career, and then also wanting to show up as all the other roles, a best friend, a mom, a sister, it's just not attainable. And so I realized that in trying to attain this to be what I felt was going to be the best version of me was actually doing the opposite by spreading myself too thin and just, not reaching that. And then also I, as someone who worked in early childhood, was trying to instill in my kids how to embrace imperfection and mistakes. And our favorite book was The Beautiful Oops, that I started to really feel like an imposter. Here I am trying to tell them how they should embrace mistakes and color outside the lines and be uniquely them, even when that might not be perfect. And it felt wrong, truly. You have to practice what you preach. And I'm so grateful I realized that earlier than later on.
It's so crazy because sometimes we think we're here to teach our children and we teach them everything that we know and, that's it. But the rate at which we grow as moms and the rate at which we can self-regulate and improve their boundaries and compassion for ourselves is amazing from what we see in our children. I feel like I've learned so much. Do you feel like there was ever, I know you just mentioned a specific turning point where you were what was it that changed for you? And also how did you actually implement that in your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I feel like there were some pivotal moments that I can think about when I was just they were kind of aha moments, but really it was sort of chipping away at it. I've used that term a few times recently on my podcast, but it really is what it felt like for me. it's not like you wake up and you're like, I can't be an achieving perfectionist anymore or a people pleaser anymore. I think it's sort of like chipping away at realizing that that's like at the core of like the struggle or the spreading yourself too thin. And I think for me, if we want to focus on like how it showed up in my kids, I just, realized I don't think it was necessarily from me. I think there is an inherent thing with certain kids with things that they love, that they want to really do it right. But I realized with my now 7-year-old early on, when she would like color outside the lines, that it was hard for her to embrace that. Like she'd want to crumple it up and throw it. And that I think you could argue is like temperament and things like that. But it also felt like here I am, like trying to help her, embrace when it's not quintessentially perfect, but I'm not living that. And realizing that wouldn't be necessarily in that moment. It wouldn't be in that moment. It would be me in a different moment, when I'd be like brushing their hair and they'd be like, Mom, it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, let me go play. Like these little call out moments. And I'm like a really big believer in like the universe. And I felt like it was like them and the universe like pointing me in that direction. I mean, I could talk about the universe for a long time, but
We love
that really is
talking about
how.
Please talk about the universe. Yeah, no, I really resonate with what you're saying. It's like showing your kids that you are imperfect too, so that they can be imperfect. So, what are some examples, like concrete examples that you show your kids? So, for example, for me, I like when I fall and like hurt myself, instead of my default reaction of like, oh, like what did you just do? Or like, I just stained my white pants. It's more like, oops, mommy made an oopsie. And I kind of try to like laugh it off with myself so that my daughter and son can really see that it's okay. We make mistakes, like oopsies. So what are some things that you do and you are really intentional with how you react so that your kids see that it's okay to be not perfect?
Yeah, you actually brought up that example and when you guys were on, and I
Yeah.
was like, I didn't know if she actually meant fall or meant like symbolically fall, but I like love that because I'm realizing that actually when I like bang my head or something like that, that it's a little bit triggering for me, and I probably try to like brush it off instead of laughing about it, which is like
Mhm.
another call out, right? But I love that, right? Like fall and make it a funny moment. But for me, it's also like when I forget things for them, I would be the one that if I forgot their water bottle, it wasn't so much as like I need to prove to myself that I'm perfect, but it was like I cannot tolerate them not having it or being like a little uncomfortable or being like, Mom forgot it, just all the things that made me spiral. And now it was enough moments of me like not even realizing I forgot it and then coming home and then realizing that they got through the day, that now if I like forget that, I don't show up and bring it, because that's honestly telling them that like not only can they not tolerate it, but like I can't tolerate forgetting it. And then also modeling what I do like in the kitchen, for instance. Like if I do this with spilling, if I spill something, or I might even make it up if I'm like cutting a cucumber and I see them watching, like, oh, it's really tough to do this. And I keep doing it not straight. I'll like stop, take a deep breath. Like I also model how I get through those like imperfect moments.
Again, it makes us like really pause and think. Like my son loves to make his lunch with me. And before I'd be like, oh, but I could just crack the egg and the shell will go right in the in the trash can and I'll just whip it up. But he really liked to crack it. And I know that there's gonna be shells and there's gonna be egg whites all over the counter and the yolk dripping. But if I say like, no, don't do it, because if you do it, it's not going to be perfect. And I show him that, he's going to be like, well, why would I try to do it? And yes, he's 2, but he's going to be like, I'm not going to try to do that if you think that when I do it, it's not perfect. So recently, like I have been letting him crack the egg, and sometimes I'll go in the corner and re-crack it, but I just show him and I see like, look, see the shells now. We pick it out, and I just make it seem like it's not a big deal. And even as you're saying, like sometimes he wakes up and his diaper is off in the morning, and sometimes a mess happens. And the first time I saw it, I remember being like, oh shoot, like we gotta go clean it up. And he totally took on that energy that now I say, like, then I start saying, oh, it's no big deal. It's okay. We'll clean it up. And now when I open his sleep sack in the morning, he goes, no big deal. And it's just so funny how like our little reactions can really impact them. And I was like, okay, you're not like doomed if you do it But, really try to catch yourself and try to
Yeah.
switch gears is amazing.
Jennie, you've been an early childhood educator for a while before you had kids, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, how is it to be practicing, quote unquote, with other people's kids and then to have kids of your own? What were like the main differences you found of like becoming a mother and doing it with your own kids versus, with other people's kids as an educator?
Yeah, this is an interesting question because it's taken different forms, as I work primarily with infants and toddlers up until like, 3, 4s. And now my girls are 5 and 7. And so when they got out of that age group, it's felt a little bit less kind of alongside one another, right? Like I can work with that age group and then come home to my kids and it doesn't feel as, you know, parallel as earlier when they were younger. It felt very much like I can practice a lot of the things with both, starting from infancy. So, I mean, I think the first realization was I had worked with infants starting at 3 months old. And when I had my first baby right at the hospital, I was like shocked by the fact that I couldn't use any of the tools to kind of calm her down. She was a little bit colicky. And I remember going to the nursery and being like, I'm like floored. I don't know how to calm her down. And so I think realizing early on that, like, even if I had all these tools and experiences, every baby is different. I think that was the biggest realization. And then also realizing how much we wrap ourselves into our own parenting, that when you're parenting other kids, at least for me, it was really easier to not wrap myself into that. I think there are people who have a hard time, no matter, if it is their career, there's triggers and things like that. But I was really able to, if a child was having a hard time, for instance, I didn't feel that like my teaching abilities were wrapped up into that. Right. But when our child is having a hard time and we're in like the middle of like the school drop off or a grocery store or something, it's hard to not feel as though like, oh my God, is this a reflection of my parenting? So that was very new to me in parenting versus working with kids outside of my own. And it's really what you were saying, Dale, like you quickly have to reflect on yourself. So that was new to me in being a parent.
So let's go to that scene that you were painting of a toddler tantrum in the middle of a grocery store. What do you do? Because I know that Dale and I are deep in it into the toddler tantrum phase, and I know a lot of our listeners are as well.
I love helping people with this scene because I feel like I hope that there's some things that you'll remember from it that you can access in that moment in what I do. So when that happens, I think our reflex is to honestly be like, oh no, there are people watching. Like, for better or worse, like, we know that we should be focusing on our kid, but we have a hard time, right? The reality is it's not just us and our child. And I really, really try to tune that out. Again, talking about, you know, bigger picture things, I really believe our children also feel that. And so that can make tantrums actually exponentially worse. They know they're not in the safety of their own home. They know that there's people around, even if they're thinking about that differently and they're like, I don't care, I can't help it. My brain is on fire. There's that added element. And then our energy impacts them. So knowing that, I really have done work in tuning everything else out because I know that by not doing that, I'm actually probably adding to the fire that's happening within my child. And then another thing that I try to remember is that my role isn't to end this. And if I try to just think about ending this, it probably will backfire and be worse. My role is to manage this, to make sure my child's, of course, first and foremost, safe and then to sort of contain it. If you're in a grocery store, that's big, overwhelming, overstimulating, but I can do my part in trying to contain this. It might mean at first, like bending down and picking up my child, depending on their age, so that they aren't feeling like they're in the middle of what they're in the middle of. And also, the quicker we try to end things, I feel like the louder our kids try to scream at us, even symbolically, instead of us being like, I'm bending down and I see you and I'm here to keep you safe. And so, what that can look like is, not reflexively going to just trying to stop it, whether it be like bribing, yelling, like freaking out, whatever it is. And again, like bending down, holding them, bending down and just saying, I'm right here. I'm here to help you. I'm not going to buy that cookie for you, but I'm here. I'll hold you. I'll give you a hug, something like that. And then, of course, like if they aren't being safe, picking them up and removing them from the situation. But I think you'll find that all of those things I just said are helping to regulate you and in turn are helping to regulate your kids. It's really hard for them to continue to radically tantrum as long as they probably would if you're just like calmly saying whatever it is that you're saying in that moment, because there's a million examples of why it might be happening.
Yeah, something that really came to me when you were saying this is the first time that she had a meltdown on the airplane. And again, public space, a lot of people staring at you, glares, all that type of stuff. And I found when I started to get really anxious and being like, oh my God, what do people think? It got so much worse. And when I got down to her level, like you said, and it was just like, okay, scream, let's both sit on the floor of the airplane together and whatnot, it actually got so much better. And we kind of built a fort on the floor and it became playful and not this like big scene. And we actually get this, people write this in all the time of like, so scared to go on the flight with a toddler. Like, what are people going to think? La, la, la. It's like the more you can let go of what other people think and just like tune into what your toddler needs, the better you're able to react in that environment. And something I love, Jennie, that you shared, I think a couple weeks ago, is also like talking to your kids and asking them like why. If they say they don't want to do something, it's like, why don't you want to do something? Do you want to do something different? Do you want the purple one instead of the blue one? Like asking them why is so powerful. And sometimes we forget that we're not there to kind of tell them what to do. We're there to like work with them. And it's such a basic thing to ask why to your kids, but why do we ask why more to our friends or to our partner than we do to our kids? So would love if you can kind of elaborate on that point.
Yeah, I think when I posted that, some people were like, "And then what?" And like, sort of the trick of me sharing something like that is like, try it and you'll see, because it automatically is giving connection to your kid instead of them saying no and us being like, "You have to listen," or "If you don't do this," the control reflex that we have. Our child saying no is them pushing back on that control. Truly, like for whatever reason, either they like want you to stop because you're rushing past them and they need a moment of connection, or they're seemingly being stubborn and obstinate because they want the cookie that you wouldn't give them for breakfast. Whatever it is, little can be unsolved through connection. And when you're asking why, you're giving them a moment of, I see you and you matter, and I'm curious why. They probably won't be able to answer why. They'll probably be like, because I wanted ice cream for breakfast. And it's not like then you're going to give them the ice cream. But this back and forth that you're opening up for them is sort of the trick for you both. You're going back and forth with your kid for a moment to diffuse that like obstinate no, to give a moment of, oh, I know you really wanted that ice cream. Since we're not going to have it for breakfast, should we plan on going tonight? Like, it gives a moment for the brains of both you and your child to sort of like calm with just the why. And it feels like an accessible tool for me to give to parents.
Yeah. And I feel like saying no, we're so tuned to say no to everything that it weakens the effect. So I feel like if we
Yeah.
just say no without saying why, we just constantly saying no, they may not take it seriously and it just becomes a reflex that everything's a no. So I love rephrasing it and then redirecting it, because you're not flat out saying no and they're just going to throw a tantrum. You're trying to, I guess, communicate with them. And I think a lot of it is the frustration of communication. They're trying to tell you something and maybe they can't express it, or maybe they're just tired and they're just complaining about everything, but you're trying to understand them, I think is a big thing. And
By the way, you did a good job with it yesterday. I remember. So Leo and Gemma were together yesterday and Leo kept wanting snacks and you gave it to him like the first time, but then you also explained how dinner was coming and that he's going to have X, Y, and Z. And just from you explaining it, you could tell that he was like, oh, okay, makes sense. And kind of like moved on versus like, no, you can't have a snack.
Right, exactly. Like I'll never tell him like, don't eat when you're hungry. But I know if I just like fill him up on all the crackers and cheese and whatever, he's not going to eat the dinner. So I also think it's okay to set a boundary. Like, of course, our kids aren't always going to know what's best for them. Like, yes, they can be our guide, but at the same time, sometimes we can see, okay, I know how this is going to end, and I know I'm the parent. So I think it's also good to set those boundaries and rules. And something that I want to go into, which is huge for you, and it's huge for me, and it's huge for Annabelle, is routines. Because I think routines are huge in the whole tantrum phase and just setting your kids up in like a safe space when they know what to expect. And you started Charmspring, which I think the springboard is right behind you. If you're listening on audio, you can't see it, but it's a really awesome springboard. So I want to hear you talk about it a bit and go into the idea behind it and the importance of routine.
Yeah, I love this topic clearly. I co-founded a company with this as the hero product. But if we kind of backtrack a little bit, so I have two partners, co-founders in Charmspring, which just reiterates that the three of us really felt a deep need to bring a visual routine board out into the world. And it's not just me as the educator that was in classrooms and saw that every classroom in the world, infants to high school, has a visual schedule for the kids. Obviously, that looks different. When you're older, it might not be pictures, but when you're younger, and you're doing circle time and preschool or younger, you're sharing what the kids can expect that day. And you're doing so visually. Who's here today? Let's sing a song about it. So I had that knowledge and gave birth to my first and then my second. And it was during COVID that I realized that they were feeling just so uneasy. My older daughter, who at the time was 2 and change, would be like, what are we doing today? And it started to like annoy me because like obviously during COVID, it's like to me, it was like a call out of like, mom, like, how are you going to entertain me? But I quickly realized it was that she felt a loss of like control and this like monumental shift or what her day to day looked like. She had stopped school, had this new baby. Mommy and daddy were home, but then daddy left because he had to go back to work early on. We were in a new place and like all of her schedules were out the window. And so it started with me actually realizing the value of when she would see pictures of herself. Like I would show her where we're going to go, if we were going to take a walk to this park, things like that. And then it clicked. I was like, wait, this is genius. Like I need to show her in pictures of herself at the time. And I remembered I loved Shutterfly coasters. I would order them for her as a play object of like the family because we weren't near my family. And so she would play with those more to see grandma and grandpa who were in Florida and whatnot. So I was like, I'm going to take pictures of her doing these things and put Velcro on the wall. And my husband's going to be thrilled that I'm making it into like a classroom. But anyway, she loved it. She loved waking up and making her schedule for that day. I shared it on Instagram and people loved it. But I think what we realize is like, not everyone's going to like put in the work to do the DIY because it's just like not what they do. This is like what I did and loved. And I get that. So anyway, fast forward to around 2 years ago. And one of my co-founders was talking to lots of moms about how she was a mom and realized the value of sketching out her daughter's routine. And we were introduced and realized like, this needs to be out in the world. We saw how much it unlocked for us as a family in helping our kids make sense of what to expect in their day, helping us to connect around talking about the routine, building more connecting moments, building executive functioning skills. Like, what do we need to do to get out the door? I mean, I could rattle on about it forever, but I'd say that it's the same need that we have for like a Google Calendar. Kids need that version for themselves.
I also think it's so motivating for the kids to like, I'm sure a lot of us deal with the struggle for them to brush their teeth or wash their hair or things like that. I know I struggle with that. And I think one of the things as adults is like having a to-do list that you check off. Like sometimes I add things to the to-do list just to check it off because it feels good. So I could see how a kid be like, see, like once you do that, you can put the piece on here and like check it off. So I think that's like, there's this whole satisfaction around that. And then just showing them like the importance of the routine and what
Structure.
to expect. And they love structure and they love what to expect. And I know that like everyone thinks they're going to be this go with the flow mom. And it's like, so I feel like people like look up just like how it's like the chill girlfriend is like looked at like, oh, the go with the flow mom, bring the kids. Like it's 9:00 dinner. Who cares? And it's like, okay, like that's great for you, but I am such a routine person. And I know that my children thrive on routine. Once in a while, sure, you're on vacation. I get that. But I think like day to day, kids feel safe and thrive on routine. And I'm such a believer in that.
Yeah. And with Griffin, my son, he's 4 months now, I got him on a routine like pretty quickly. And with Gemma, I didn't put her on a routine. I would kind of like feed whenever. And it was like night and day difference for not only me and feeling better and back to myself faster, but also for him. He was sleeping much better than Gemma did. I really just do think as humans, we thrive off of routine. So Jennie, if there's people who are listening who have a hard time getting in a routine, who schedules maybe isn't their forte, or who are just like having a hard time getting into a rhythm, what would you suggest?
So I'd say to start, like, even if you feel overwhelmed by like, oh, once I get the springboard or once I, figure out a routine, it means I can't flex from that. That's actually not true. I think it helps everyone flex more. It's like similar to what I was saying with the Google Calendar. Like, if there's times where you have to just like completely ignore it, at least you have a landing space for it, right? Like you could go back to it. And that's truly like the way it helps to wire kids too, that yeah, we're still going to do all of these. You'll still get your snack and your lunch and your dinner, and you'll get your time for book, whatever it is that they like thrive on knowing when it's going to happen. You can see how that can help unlock so many other times where like you want to steer from the routine. And then I would say, like what you're saying, Dale, about the accomplishment within it, like that motivated me a lot too, to use the one that I printed out on Shutterfly and really implement this. I saw how it was helping them with their confidence and their independence, and showing me that, right? Like those times where I'm like, tomorrow morning, mommy's going to make breakfast, daddy won't be there. Like, so let's go over what you guys could do. And then in the morning, they run up to me and be like, you wouldn't believe what my board looks like. I was able to move everything. Like, how much more that helps us all than like the frenzied, frantic former me that would try to get a handle on everything. So I'd say like the way that it has helped them feel so good about themselves helped motivate me to really like spend the time Sundays to like lay out their week with them. And if you have the smaller one, to lay out like whatever it is for that day.
Another thing you touch on, I think, is autonomy, especially with the springboard. It's like allowing your kids to have autonomy over their day and their choices. And that is one thing that I've really leaned into in my last couple of months of mothering a toddler, is really letting her have accountability and autonomy over her schedule. And she's also a very visual person. So this type of thing is just, I think, incredible, especially for toddlers. I mean, if you look at every pretty much preschool, at least that I visited, you see how they have those like emotional boards of like, how are you feeling? And there's like red for angry, or, all that kind of stuff. And it's again, bringing in this like visualness and labeling something and getting them to articulate what they want and their emotion and the activity choice that they want. So I think this type of thing is just so incredible and so needed for our toddlers to really become more independent and feel more confident in who they are.
And it's just kind of like how adults on vacation, like we would not feel good about being on vacation for a whole year. Like we would be like, oh, like craving our routine. Even after 2 weeks or a week, I'm like, I want to get back to my routine. But it also doesn't feel good to only stay in your routine. You're going to be like, oh, I need to get out of here. So it's so nice when you have a structure in place so that you can go back to and you can integrate into your life easily. But also stepping away from that doesn't make everything feel like Groundhog's Day and so mundane. So it really is like a vacation. And I also think when I tell my toddler what to expect for the day, he gets so much more excited about it. Like he keeps saying, Tuesday, soccer with Gemma. Like he's been saying, and he goes, no, Monday, I do this. And now I tell him the days of the week and I tell him what he's doing. And I think that really gets him hyped for it versus like, okay, here we are. Like, although I have seen like people say, don't tell your kids about going on a vacation or like to Disneyland until the second you get there because they won't start talking about it. That's obviously different.
No, I love that point you made about like routine, but also like going on vacation. It's important to let go. And like, even I spent the summer in Paris last summer, and I really kind of got my whole like bringing up Bebe lessons about like learning how to let go. And like, if she goes to bed late, like, okay, so be it. If she wakes up late, if she doesn't eat on time. And it was really helpful for me, who's like very type A, to kind of let go. And I think not only does it help our kids also to have this like leeway and to like let them be free a bit, it also is like really helpful for you. It's very freeing for a mom to just be like, okay, this is like what I set out to do normally day to day, but it's okay if we veer in and out. It's like almost giving ourselves like this like freedom to like just paint outside of the box, as we talked about at the beginning. Okay, but
Yeah.
Jennie, you have so many things going on. So I want to ask you, so you have two companies, you are a podcast host, you are a mother, you are an educator, you're so many things. I know the concept of like balance isn't, I don't love the term balance because we're never really leading quite balanced lives, but what does like balance look for you in today's life?
I'm someone that gets really excited by things and loves to do a lot of things. And early on in motherhood, I was lucky enough to be able to do a lot of those things with my kids, like coexisting in them, like by founding Union Square Play. They were with me a lot until, they sort of aged out of it, but they were just there with me yesterday. Anyway, my short answer is that I'm still figuring that out. And what that's looked like is realizing quickly that if I'm taking on something new, it means something else I have to make less time for. There's only a certain amount of hours in the day, and being really mindful of that. That being said, like taking on this new concept of Charmspring and creating that company, like I also knew that Union Square Play was in a place where we were lucky enough for it to be managed by an incredible team. And then also, like me taking on being a podcast host was really to allow me more space with the content I was putting out. Like today, I had amazing content from you guys, and it meant that I could really, plan less for my own content and start to be really mindful of my kids and, show them as they're growing in a way that felt more aligned. So it might seem like I'm taking on more, but I actually feel like it's meant that I'm evolving in all the things, making space and putting less into other things, not in a way where I'm like ignoring or putting things on the back burner, but only taking on what I feel like I can do, but still figuring that out every day, truly.
I really love this point, and because I think what you're really saying is that your identity is very fluid and you're kind of like bringing things in and out and not attaching to certain identities and certain outcomes. You're kind of like being fluid with it, which I think is such a beautiful approach to identity because sometimes we really attach to things. And just because we started Union Square Play, we have to be as involved as we were at the beginning of it. And what you're allowing yourself is to really flow and to see like what excites you, what fulfills you, and what do you really want to create and build, and just kind of like go with it instead of just clinging on to certain things. It really feels like it brings like the opportunities that come your way, it allows them to flourish versus kind of stay scarce because of all the things that you have hung on to from the past.
Yeah, but that wasn't like something that I just inherently had within me. I've had Union Square Play since 2018. And I will say that in 2018, like I definitely thought differently about it. Not necessarily that would be like the only thing, but just, yeah, definitely wrapping up my whole identity in that. But then realizing, that there was more I wanted to do than brick and mortar, especially as, I couldn't bring my kids there anymore. I guess I will say that I felt like it's been fluid alongside like what I feel my number one role is, which is being a mom and figuring out what feels like I can show up as my best self.
So, for those of you who don't know what Union Square Play is, because I know we've talked about it, can you just briefly explain a bit about it so our audience,
Yeah. And so when I was becoming a mom, I realized that, I had this experience working with very young kids in a daycare early learning setting, and the socialization that comes from that, but also realizing that, running that program wouldn't allow me to really take any time being at home with my young kids. So I was like, how can I do this and offer this amazing socialization and community and connecting, and also allow moms to come together? And so I started moms groups, which led to play classes for young babies and toddlers. And then we created Union Square Play, which embodied all of that. And we offered moms groups, classes, music classes, play classes. I was a teacher. I was the manager with my co-founders, and I also led moms groups. And really the most beautiful thing was that I felt like I wasn't parenting alone. And that has been the most paramount thing that I've wanted to keep with Union Square Play, along with like seeing how it's evolved and grown and how I've been able to delegate. So yeah, Union Square Play is a place that moms and parents and caregivers can go to in those years before they're going to preschool or alongside preschool to connect with each other and to offer their kids something that I feel is really optimal for them, where they are developmentally and socially, and yeah, opening up their worlds.
So you mentioned that you've just been able to delegate more and you were not always like this idea, having a fluid
No.
identity. What do you think changed when you started Union Square Play to today in the sense of like who you are, but also certain things that you leaned more into? Like maybe you're saying no more, maybe you're asking for help more, maybe you're not trying to be like, oh, I have to do it all. Maybe you've removed pressure. Like what are some of the things that you've done from now until then to allow you to have such a fluid identity and to create and to build all of these new parts of yourself?
I'd say it was a combination of basically situations that I found myself in and also like internal work. So for instance, like during COVID, when we closed our physical space, I realized how much like my identity was tied to that. It was really, really hard for me on like a cellular level to not have this physical space that had been part of my motherhood, new identity, for the 2 years before we had to close in 2020. And then quickly realizing that what I loved most about it, I could still do with these virtual mom groups. So that was like the first time I realized like it doesn't need to depend on this physical space. And then as these moms groups grew virtually, delegating, by growing them. There was other facilitators besides me. And so that was like my first glimpse of like, it doesn't need to just be me. And these people are still gaining so much by connecting with one another, not only not in a physical way in person, but also it didn't have to be me. And then I'd say I took that knowledge with me, even when we returned to a physical space and we opened more locations, it couldn't just be me and actually was doing a disservice when it would just be relying on me. So yeah, that was both situational and also like internal work. And then I'd say people calling me out, like, my co-founders of Union Square Play would be like, you're not allowed to be on this meeting. You're not allowed to do these things. Like you have to go out and do the things that we feel are your, expertise and skill set. And then we'll help take on more people for these other things. Yeah. And then being able to like do that without someone like setting those boundaries for me.
Yeah, it's so interesting because we talk about identity a lot, and we're actually coming out with our program, The Next Chapter, that helps moms figure out this next phase of their life. And I think a big thing we talk about that you touched on is this identity piece. Who am I without, even a physical location? And sometimes we think that certain things legitimize us. And again, we walk into a room, we can fall back on that when we talk to other parents. So it's really interesting to see sometimes what can come out of it when we release that. And it's literally something we were just talking about. So I love that. And also I want to touch on something you brought up earlier about socialization aspect. I feel like there's a camp of parents that think it's important to socialize their kids young, and then others that say it's not necessary. Now, you being with a child who, during the COVID era, when you're completely isolated, what was that like for you? And what is your approach? Like, what is your thought on, how much socialization kids actually need? Is daycare helpful? And I think that I personally believe like every family is unique, but I think there's a lot of pressure for parents to feel like, oh, I have to socialize my kid at like 15, 18 months. I have to send them the program. Like, what is your actual take on that?
It's so interesting because I saw early on the magic that came from like babies being in a group, truly it being like if they stopped what they were doing and noticed another baby and you saw that like, baby who wasn't mobile, like move closer to the other baby. I was able to see like so many of those micro moments. And it's why I was like, I'm sending my baby like right from the start while I'm, the director of this program, they're going to be in this school. And I really believe in the value of that. But then I also realized once I had my first baby that I didn't feel comfortable. Like I truly felt she was like a little bit, like I said, colicky, all those things that like I didn't feel like she could be in that setting. So realizing like, what's the other option? And I felt like there weren't many of them. So I will say that I think every family is different. I don't think it needs to be where you have to choose. I think people do choose because of obviously like jobs, careers, family structure, that I need to go to daycare or I need to have a nanny or this or that. And that's definitely a real thing. I think for me, I didn't want to have to choose. And I also felt lonely. And so it felt like maybe I could create something. I think there's also something there about even if you have hired a caregiver, I felt like I wanted my baby even early on, not to just be alone with that person all day, even if it was like, I want them at the park, I want them to go to a coffee shop and notice other people. And then, of course, I was lucky that where I was able to be like, just go to Union Square Play, but it doesn't have to be that. I think it's just about being in the world and what that looks like, as you guys said, can be so many different things. I've thought about how Annabelle spent the summer in Paris and how like what that looks like there is probably like people congregating in parks and like you said, just not having so much structure and just community and it can look so different. So I will say that it really just means I think exposing them to things in the world.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because what I learned from Paris is that there was less focus on stimulus and like constant classes and mommy and me and drawing class and sensory class. It was just like you bring them to the park or you just bring them to your part of your everyday life, which like going to the grocery store, out for dinner. And that is kind of enough on its own. I think sometimes as moms, we feel like a pressure to sign them up for every single class under the sun because everyone's doing it. And what I've found after living in Paris is that I kind of like stripped back to the basics and kind of like let her get messy in the playground, let her go to the park. She doesn't have to go to all of these things. But one thing on the topic of socialization, you also mentioned this on your Instagram in a post that I really resonated with is the concept of sharing. Would love if you can share in more detail what that means for toddlers, because I hear it everywhere I go. And sometimes I'm guilty of saying it, although I try not to. It's like, Gemma, you have to share with Leo, or let's share. And like, what does that mean in their little brains? And what are some like alternatives to that word?
Yeah, honestly, like this could be like a whole podcast episode. So maybe I should do that, but I will try to be brief. That I early on in the approach that I, resonated most with that I built a program around called RIE. Resources for Infant Educators is what the acronym stands for, but it's about respectful parenting. And so I believed early on that not only are young babies and toddlers not cognitively ready to share, but that it's also disrespectful to ask them to from like a developmental standpoint. When we're asking a child to share, they're holding a doll and another baby's waiting and we say, give her that share. From a developmental perspective, a toddler, let's say 12, 18 months, believes that you're asking them to give up something that they're using for the sake of someone else. And so it could be a very slippery slope if you're constantly doing that. I will also caveat with that, everything in like moderation. But if you're thinking about like when I was running programs, training these teachers, they're with these babies, toddlers all day, that if they're constantly asking them to share because another is waiting, I really believe that the messaging we're sending is they're more important. And instead, I think you can create structure around having more options or, if it's the other child waiting, you're waiting to use that doll. What else can we use in the meantime? The child who's using the doll is aware, oh, there's someone else waiting. And it has so much more, you know, authentic meaning if that toddler then goes over to give it, without someone asking. And I will say that I've implemented this approach with my daughters since they were really, really young and that they share. They're really at the developmental, you know, standpoint now at 5 and 7 that they can share. They totally notice I have more of this. There's this many friends around. I will share. Or Nellie, I see you're waiting. I'm almost done. And I don't think that authentically comes from us just like training them in that. I think it's about narrating, it looks like you're waiting, or when they're grabbing, you both really want this doll. Someone then gives it up and walks away. You realize that we put such emphasis on material objects that really it's often not so important to them that early on.
So would you say something like, okay, it's your turn on the slide. after your turn, you wouldn't even say anything like that? Or what would you say?
Oh yeah. If they're both like struggling for a slide or like a physical experience and they're online, yeah, depending on like, I saw that she was waiting for the slide. You're going to go after her type thing. If you didn't see it, saying it looks like you both really want to go on this slide. Someone might then, just with like an adult coming in, walk away. Or if they're not, saying, I'm going to, put my hand here. So nobody's going to go on the slide until we can figure out who goes first. It's about like a problem solving mentality instead of being like the referee. I think if we play the role of referee always, like kids depend on that. But I had this video of both my girls struggling to go on the slide where I finally was like, we have to take a break from the slide, as opposed to me like being there, like dictating like what I believe should happen each time. And then we had like a fresh perspective, went back, and they were able to kind of navigate the slide together. It sounds easier said than done, but once you like believe this approach, you see that like they're really problem solvers.
Yeah, I feel like it's a muscle that you have to keep exercising as a mom so that it starts coming
Absolutely.
naturally.
I would say like one thing I always tell my kids or my older toddler is when so-and-so is done with it, then you can use it. Like it's a very, like if he tries to take away a toy and really train him, like he is using it or she's using it when she's done, you can use it. And my older one always tries to take a toy away from my 9-month-old. And like, obviously he can't advocate for himself. And of course the baby doesn't know any different. I could give him a different toy, but I show my toddler, no, that was Luke's toy. You have to give it back to him and he's not done with it. Because even though he's so young, I have to teach the older one, like, I can't just take a toy from you and you can't just take a toy from me.
Yeah.
You have to. And then he usually does end up, oh, here you go. And it is that moment of where you're like, no, this person has ownership over it right now. But I love that. And yeah, I think sharing is something big because sometimes we feel it's a reflection of us, especially if we're in a group setting at a mommy and me class and you see a kid share because we're, adults and we want to be generous and we want to be respectful and polite, but we just have to get rid of that and be like, these are children. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Okay, a quick rapid fire questions. But what is the best piece of advice you would give a new mom, especially as it relates to like letting go of the pressure and the noise and opinions and kind of tuning into your own intuition when it comes to parenting?
Yeah, I always like love the idea of something that my mom always told me early on that had not as much meaning then, but has so much more now. She would always say, go with your gut. And at the time, it was like, okay, mom, like sort of eye rolly. But I find that when I don't do that, or I'm like looking externally, whether it be for the validation, for the permission, for the what do I do, which of course you can ask your friends, like, I'm having trouble with this decision. But when you don't, when it conflicts with like really your authentic self, like it doesn't work. You might not, if you're listening to this, like actually believe that. But once I've said it now, if you can remember it, you'll realize that, you can kind of like kick the can around with that. But really, like it comes back to like, your kids best, yourself best. If there's a million, like they're saying classes and activities and you're like, oh, I think I should do that. Like you could do that, but then you'll quickly realize yourself, like, I didn't need to do that. And so I think it's just a matter of how long that takes. And it wasn't something I realized just upon becoming a mom. I realized over time that now has helped me be so much more confident in my decision making by really like thinking about like what's best for my kids. They're the only Tess and Mel out there. And what's best for our family. We're the only Monness family. And like, you feel like you're the expert in that.
Last question, because you asked us something similar too. What is one thing in modern motherhood that needs to be normalized?
No matter what the reason, whether it's in public or behind closed doors, when they cry, we feel like it's like a sign of something. But really, it's just a sign that our child is communicating a sadness, a loss, I don't want to do this. And really like taking the noise out of that helps you work through those like bigger emotions and tantrums and things like so much more clearly. Don't add more onto that. Just know that crying is normal. And the more we normalize it, the more they'll grow up to normalize it. Not necessarily like crying inappropriately, but they'll feel more accepting of their emotions if we cannot wrap ourselves and like who we are as a parent into them too.
Love that.
That was a really good
That's
answer.
a good one.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
Oh, good.
Well, you so much, Jennie, for coming on the pod. And we will link your information in our show notes.
But where can everyone
find you?
Great. Yes, you can find me at Jennie Monness on Instagram, where I share, tidbits about my own motherhood journey with my girls. If you're in New York City, come to Union Square Play. And if you're in need of some order and routine and sort of this like foundational place to start with your kids, you can find us at Charmspring. And listen to us on the pod.
Thank you so much for coming on. And we loved having you.
We're so excited for everyone to hear.
So excited for everyone to hear.
Thank you, guys.